And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 277. Today we're going to be talking about low light photography. This is the point whereby, unless you've got your camera completely on auto, you really need to test your skills as a photographer. So how do we cope with it? Stick around and we'll find out. So if you're watching live, leave a comment down below and we can make a start. Yes, so, and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 277. We're live here on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know what the weather's doing. And hit the like as well, if you're for anybody who is here already, because I think it tends to let the YouTube algorithms know that there's something live going out, and it occasionally plonks it in front of a few other potential photography interested viewers. I see we've got a couple of, so today we're going to be talking about the notion of low light photography. I'll explain. Well, I see we've got a couple of people in already. So let's do a few little hellos and welcomes, and then we can kind of make a start on what this is all about. So, where are we? Let's just get rid of that. And I see April's in. It says, greetings from a brutally cold 8 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny Long Island, New York. Somehow always easier to cope with the cold when it's sunny. Sandra joins us from a gloomy, overcast Birmingham in the UK. Still, it's not raining until the end of the week. That's okay then. So Lisa says, good morning from an extremely cold, single-digit, sunny Maryland. Sounds like very similar kind of weather to New York there as well. Susan says, hi from another miserable day in Kakubri. Fed up of this now. At least it's not too cold. It's true. It's warmed up a fraction. I think it's maybe now up to 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. VG says, good evening from Chennai. John says, good day all. This brutal cold makes it hard to go out and take photos. True, you need to have warm gloves or warm but yeah, then you can't necessarily operate the bits on the camera. It's a tricky one, it's true. And Nicola says, hello Kim, from another cloudy day here in southwest Scotland. Excellent. So we have people in. We have a topic to talk about. So, excuse me. What we can do is we can make a start. So what's today about? Today is about the idea of low light photography. And I've talked about this in sort of different ways before now. There are previous podcasts specifically dedicated to high ISO, to wide aperture, to slow shutter speed. And it's one of these things that crops up an awful lot. The problem of photography in where there's low light. I mean, there's that notion of, well, okay, night photography. Yes, we know exactly what we're up against with that. But low light actually kind of straddles anything whereby you're not getting enough light into the camera that you need for the effect that you want. And so that's what we're going to be dealing with. I'm going to talk a little bit about all the usual ISO, aperture and what have you, but it's also about the notion of strategy in a way. Because essentially it's all about compromise. Where do you compromise and how do you decide which bit you're going to compromise on if you're not getting as much light as you need? Marilyn's joined us from sunny Colorado. She says she's sorry to hear about the cold weather over on the east coast of America there. So, yeah, so in essence, this podcast here about low light photography was triggered by Sandra in Birmingham. And I'll tell you what, so Sandra sent me, she wrote in several weeks ago and said, I've been having a think about topics about the areas of photography I want to improve. And one topic that comes to mind is night photography. This last year, when I was out with my nephew and we visited a number of light festivals, Winter Lights, Canary Wharf, Battersea Lights, Birmingham Light Festival, Matlock Illuminations, River of Light, Liverpool, and finally the Christmas lights in London. In an ideal world, you would take a tripod and do bracketed exposures. However, most of the time this isn't possible because the art installation is moving or changing colour, there are too many people making it difficult to get sufficient space, and finally security won't allow you. So my challenge is to try and get the best photos of the light festivals I can for the annual Days Out photo book I create for my nephew and myself at the end of each year. And she goes on to say that she's usually trying to do the wide aperture and slower shutter speeds and trying to keep her ISO as low as possible and what have you. But the constant difficulty of trying to get the kind of photos that you want. I'm interested to see what you would recommend in terms of settings and what's possible in Photoshop, and to see if there's anything she could perhaps improve. And is the idea of doing, say, handheld bracketed photos worth experimenting with? Essentially what it comes down to is Sandra then is, oh, hang on, so what have we got here? Oh, Janet's joined us from Mississauga in Toronto, where it's cold but clear, minus 17 degrees Celsius, though feels like minus 25. And Janet's, Susan's saying, hope there's some heating on the bus there. So what we're talking about then here is, okay, what Sandra's talking about is the problem of, okay, she's talking night photography and light festivals. Now, in a way, there's a slightly more specific edge here, which is, it's not just a case of low light, it's contrasting light. What you have is it's all dark, but then you have big spots of light where the art illumination is lit up. But by and large, the problem, what I realised everything that I came up, when I was thinking about how I would answer Sandra with this, applies to kind of low light photography in general. And then I started thinking also about the idea that we could take this topic and set a challenge. So I will be doing that. So in 2 weeks' time, we will have the low light photography challenge. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the podcast. But what do we mean by low light? That's our starting point, really. And ultimately, what we're talking about here is, in order for the camera to work, a certain amount of light has to come in and then hit the sensor. Now, in original glass plate times, you took the cap off the lens, the light came in and it hit the glass plate and reacted with the silver nitrate or whatever chemicals were being used on the glass. Then we get up to the notion of film, and the light has got to hit the negative. And when we're talking about modern day cameras, or I say modern day, anything for over 100 years old, but you click, you press a shutter, the shutter opens, light comes in, hits the negative. And then these days we click it, the shutter opens, and the light then hits digital sensors. And all this information then it goes to capture the image that's in front of us, or a version of the image that's in front of us. Because it's not absolutely exact. That old notion that the camera never lies, biggest piece of nonsense ever said about photography. The camera is incapable of telling the truth. It's incapable of telling the truth as the way we perceive what's in front of us. And we talked before about the fact that it's 2 dimensions instead of 4 dimensions, that it's very restricted from one particular angle rather than the fact that we move around our head, we look around the place. But it's also, there's a sophistication level with the camera that not every camera can cope with the conditions that our human eye does either. And then if the shutter is open too long, then you get the image can be smudged or blurred. So there's all sorts of different things, which means that the camera doesn't necessarily record that accurately what we would see with the eye. But you also have the problem that because of the mechanical and digital restrictions of the camera, it means when we get to low light situations where there's not enough light coming in, it's not responding particularly well. The image goes too dark. So we've got to have a minimal amount of light to hit the sensor in order to get an image that we can make sense of and that potentially we could edit. So there's 2 levels of this. One is the light hitting the sensor so we can get our base image. The second bit is whether we can then push some of those levels to get more out of it than seems to originally appear. And that's part of the editing process. And in the darkroom, that will be about how long you're kind of exposing the negative to the paper underneath. And in these digital days, that's about where you can put it into Camera Raw or play around in Photoshop or other editing programs and see what detail you can draw out of the shadows or pull down out of the highlights. So low light photography then is basically at whatever point we have to start going out of our zone whereby we could get everything we want. So what does that mean as a kind of a baseline? So it might mean that, for example, what are our ideal settings? So if I've got my camera, it might be that as a shutter speed, I want to have something like a minimum of around about 125th, 160th of a second. And that shutter speed depends on a number of things, but by and large, what we're talking about is the fact that if I've got a fairly heavy DSLR and I'm holding it, there's a certain amount of handshake, wobble, whatever's going on. And if my shutter speed is too slow and I go click, the act of clicking, I'm going to wobble, I'm going to move a bit, and that's going to create a blurred image. The image is not going to be in focus. Whereas if I get above about 160th, ideally even 200th of a second, then mostly, unless I've got a super zoom on it, it's going to cope with my handshake. So we want to have something which is fast enough to get past the idea of accidental blur. Then there's the idea of our aperture, our depth of focus. And the narrower our aperture, the deeper depth of focus, the more things are in focus from front to back of what we're taking a photo of. And maybe an ideal would be something like about an f8, because an f8 will get most of the things that you're photographing will be in focus. And certainly it gets you past the idea that if you're focusing here, that a bit in front and a bit behind is completely in focus. So if the subject moves a little bit, or you move a little bit, or whatever, then there's leeway. Whereas if you have a very wide aperture and a very narrow depth of focus, it might be that you're focusing on the eye here, but a slight little wobble means that it's now focused on the ear, and the eye is out of focus. So in a kind of generalized coverall basis, having something like an f8 is quite a good place to go. And then your ISO is to do about the quality of the film. The higher the ISO, the more grainy, the more noisy it gets, the less high quality it is. Whereas the lower the number, the better. So if you can get an ISO of 100, it tends to give you a very clean image. And that clean image is great for printing. It's also great if every time you kind of go in and you do another layer of editing, you're slowly kind of degrading the image a bit. So if you're starting off with a really good image, you can degrade a little bit by editing it a bit more, and it's not going to be overly noticeable. Whereas if you have a high ISO, the image is already quite well degraded. And then if you're degrading it further by trying to edit it, it can end up as a real mess. So our ideal settings then, something like 160th of a second, shutter speed, f8, and, 100 ISO. But how often do we get these conditions? Now, bright sunlight on a sunny day, lovely. Yes, more than that. In fact, we can go for a much higher shutter speed and still have everything we want. But here, living in Scotland, as Susan and Nicola will tell you, and Nadia when she's about as well, you can't rely on those kind of days. Interestingly, when Robert and Anne from Texas came over in November, one of their slight complaints was the fact that, they hadn't realised actually just how early it gets dark in November in Scotland. Scotland is considerably further north than Texas. Even when you get into Canada, Nova Scotia is level with the middle of France, and we're several hundred miles further north than that. We're not quite Arctic Circle, but we are certainly further north. So the chances of you having the amount of light you want is fairly limited. So the next question then becomes, if that's the case, and there's not enough light coming in, where do we compromise? Where do we go next? April's wishing it was spring, and that Sandra's agreeing with her. Oh, Meg's joined us as well. Welcome, Meg. So our options then are basically, one of the things we can do is we can introduce more light. Okay, so maybe artificial light. We set up with lights, we set up with a flash, something like that. Now, I'll tell you what I will do. Let me rearrange my desktop a little bit here so that I can then start doing a little bit of screen sharing with you. And so let me kind of show you, so where am I going to start here? I think what I will start with is, yes, I've got a whole bunch of pictures here, but I'm certainly, yeah, okay, let's just go with this, okay, to show you what happens. So Now, this is a set of photo demonstrations I was doing during Spring Fling a few years ago. So this, here we've got a picture of a young woman called Holly. And this was in the ambient light. I was in a space where I was doing photography demonstrations. And there's an overhead light. We're in a kind of old converted barn. There's a concrete block wall behind that's been painted white. And when I look at this, what we've got here is it's set at an f7.1, 200th of a second. The ISO is 6400. And the light is quite dull, not overly interesting. Coming down from above. But this ISO, 6400 means it's grainy, it's noisy. We look at the hair, there's not a lot of detail. It's this sort of, the quality of it isn't that great. So what if I then introduce extra light, and maybe I put a flash, or and boom, we get light. Now there's loads of light. Now at this one, we've got it at 100 ISO. Okay, so now we've got a really nice clean image. And if we zoom in, we can now see all the strands of the hair to the end. We've not got all that noise that we had. We can make out lovely little bits of detail in the cardigan or the sweater there. But the problem is what we've got here, though, is you're up against a kind of, one of the problems is if you're using a flash on top of your camera, is the light is horrible. I mean, it might give us plenty of light, but it's not a good light. It's not that great a picture. It just it whites out the face. It's not a lot of fun. So what you really want to do is move the flash around. Now, some of you may have seen me do this before. So here we move the light. You take the flash off the camera, you move it round. This is moved around about 45 degrees, and suddenly the light becomes a little bit more interesting. Move it round 90 degrees, it changes again. Move it around then 90 degrees, and maybe there's a reflector on the other side. And then I've also got then a light behind coming down and hitting the back of the hair there. So now I've got one light, a reflector, a backlight. We're now starting to get the reflector, as you can see, is filling in some of the shadow over here. We can put a coloured gel on the light. Make it look a little bit more interesting. We can add smoke where the light kind of dissipates all over the place. We can stick the light right behind her with the smoke about, and these reflectors and lights and what have you. And we're getting much more interesting kind of fun things to do with the picture. And all of these then are at 100 ISO, so I could then go in and I could edit them quite happily. The problem is, though, is that we've had to introduce extra light into it, and that isn't always possible. First of all, if we put the flash on top of the camera, it's like I say, the light doesn't tend to be very good. It's a last resort. It's and it has all sorts of problems. The other problem you've got is that if you're in a social situation, it's a very unsociable thing to do for people. People might just be wandering around doing their own thing, and if suddenly there's a light going off in their face, is not particularly pleasant. Then if you're wanting to put the camera, the flash off camera, you then need to start setting it up. You need to have it somewhere else. You maybe need somebody else to hold it, or you need to have space to be able to stick it on a tripod or plant it somewhere where nobody else is going to knock it over. And basically, if you're in any kind of outdoor, social, public kind of situation, it's extremely awkward to try and introduce those extra elements. You have to already have the control over the environment, as well as having the knowledge of how to use it and all the rest of it. So that notion of introducing other light can be problematic. So the next thing you might do, if you can't use the flash, is slow down your shutter speed. And when you slow down your shutter speed, that allows more light to come in into the lens. But the problem you then end up with is blur, right? Is that sense that the more light the longer the shutter is open, the more any movement is just going to kind of smear across the sensors. As such, you end up with motion blur going on. And if you're trying to get a sharp image, then that can be problematic. Now, so what we're talking about here then is, so one compromise is to introduce new light. That's maybe not. Another compromise then is to slow down your shutter speed. And you might, depending on what you're photographing, be able to slow it down a bit. But the more you slow it down, the more problematic it becomes. Sometimes we go back to that notion of the hand wobble, and at that point maybe a tripod is useful. If you don't have a tripod, you can do things like, if you're leaning against a pole or a fence post or a wall, you can also, if you've got the strap around your neck, you can pull the strap tight against and kind of use your body a bit more like a tripod. These things will maybe give you an extra few stops down on your shutter speed. Another very useful thing, some of you may remember one of these. Nice little beanbag, little polystyrene balls in these things, quite cheap to pick up. These are great because you can then stick them on a wall or an uneven surface, plonk your camera on it, and it just sort of sinks into it. Like a good beanbag does, it molds itself around it. So consequently, having that something like this is quite a good little thing to have on you as well. So some kind of beanbag. You can make your own, or like I say, you can buy cheap ones quite easily. So you can slow your shutter speed down, or you can. The other thing you can do is you can widen your aperture. So you get your f-stop lower and lower and lower. So if you can get to an f.4, an f2.8, depending on your lens, maybe a 1.8, then the wider your aperture, the more light comes in. However, your sacrifice with that is the fact that your depth of field narrows. So it's back to this fact that if what you're focusing on moves a little bit, or you move a little bit, then suddenly it might not be in focus. Now, depending on your camera, some cameras are able to lock onto the focus. So you focus on it, and the way the button you're holding down allows it to maintain focus on that thing. So even if you wobble or it moves, it will track it. So part of getting around this also depends on the sophistication of your camera. Okay, the more expensive cameras generally are giving you better options for getting around these kind of technical difficulties. It's not necessarily that you get a better photo overall. You still need the skills and understanding of narrative, composition, light, and all the rest of it to get a good photo. But if you understand these things, then the things like the tracking, better ISO composition, compensation, good lenses with wider apertures, all these things can help you get what you want more easily. And then we come along to the notion of ISO. And ISO is really one of these things which is, the lower the ISO, the cleaner the image, the higher the ISO, the dirtier, messier the image tends to be. Noisier is the word I was looking for. And so what we're up against now, different cameras cope with different levels of ISO at different levels. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. And I think probably the easiest thing is, let me show you. So this photo here is the same as this photo here. Okay. So what we've got is we've got a little mannequin holding a lump of coal in front of a little multi-fuel stove fireplace, and a little coal scuttle, coal shovel for the coal scuttle down by the side. So this was just very quickly taken, unedited. Now, this version of it is, so both of them are f4.5, 1/20th of a second. Now this is the 100 ISO. Okay, so 100 ISO, lovely clean image, except for the fact that there's not enough light to get in, so it's completely dark. So if I zoom in here, you can maybe, almost make out something, but it's just too dark. You're not really seeing anything. Now, in order to let more light in, this one here is also f4.5, 1/20th of a second, but it's 12,000 ISO, 12,800. Now, my earlier cameras wouldn't go as high as 12,800. I've got a good quality camera. It allows me 12,800. But what it does mean, though, is if we go in, it's pretty noisy. Now, this is the JPEG version. What I'll do, I'll show you what happens with the, if I open tell you what I will do. I will, if I double click on that one. So this is the raw version. Okay. So if we zoom in here in the raw version, you've now got a better sense of the amount of noise that's in here. Okay. So a noisy photo. It's not brilliant. And if I'd had enough light and I could have gone for a 100 ISO, that would have given me a lovely clean image. So let's open that for a moment. But let's also show what happens if I open up the 100 ISO one. What I can do is then this is where sophistication starts coming in with the in the post-processing, is I can take the exposure and I can bring the exposure up. And now there is detail within it. If I boost the whites as well, I can bring it right up here. So despite the fact that, the initial photo seems black, we've got a picture here, but now the noise is terrible. And so what's happening here? This is actually a 100 ISO, but while it was 100 ISO, there wasn't enough light coming in. So it was a clean image to start with, but we've had to drag it out from the depths so much that actually, even though this started off as a 100 ISO image, if I open that and place it next to that, we can see that the quality is considerably worse than if we'd just gone with a high ISO to begin with. So there are times when the high ISO is necessary. It's not brilliant, but it means that you still get a picture where if you were playing around with a lower ISO, which should give you a cleaner image, but then you're trying to drag the details out afterwards, there's a lot less you can do with it. The details are quite horrific. Okay, so we're now very, very limited with what we can do with something like this. And even if I open that again, so let's open that, and let's say I was using things like the let's go to the detail, and they've got a DeNoise option, and I'll apply the DeNoise. Now, because this is working on my computer, sometimes what happens is you might get a little bit of buffering with the podcast. So it's denoised it, everything's good because it was there was a color noise in there. It's given it this green tinge. It's still not absolutely brilliant. There's a limit to, and if I open that, it's cleaned it up. It's better than, it's better than that maybe, but so it's even using Photoshop's incredibly sophisticated denoise, it's still not actually as good as a higher ISO, natural high ISO image. I hope this is all making sense. I'm here blethering away. I can't see anybody's eyebrows twitching or puzzled look on their face. So I'm kind of hoping you're following me here. Yes, so, and I'm also thinking that I might have just missed out something else that I was going to talk about. It's okay for the moment, I think. Right, let's flip back. Okay, Marilyn says, yes, it makes sense. Well, that's good. One of you's following. So ultimately, what we're talking about, Lisa says I've experienced all of these. Yeah, okay, great. So what we're talking about then is the notion that when you are taking the photo and there's not enough light, you have to prioritize something. So first of all, what you might do is go for a wider aperture, except for the fact that you're running the risk of it not being in sharp focus if you can't guarantee that you're focusing on the bit that you want to focus on. You've got no leeway. Your second option, or another option, is to go for a slower shutter speed. And that's fine if the item you're looking at isn't moving and you can find a way of keeping the camera steady independent of you holding it or sometimes if you're down to something like 2-second exposure, or 1-second exposure, the very act of pressing the shutter on the camera is going to make it wobble. So you might need to use a timer or a remote switch or something like that, so that you're not actually touching it at the point that it goes click. And the other one is the ISO. So basically, what I tend to do is, if I'm in a situation whereby the light is sort of slightly, okay, I've got to compromise, I will put the ISO on auto, and I will and then I will make the adjustments to a shutter speed that I'm comfortable with and an aperture I'm comfortable with, and then let the ISO essentially take up the balance. Okay, because in the end, as I showed you, and I think showed you very, very clearly with that notion of the little figure in front of the fireplace, a high ISO image is better than a low ISO image that's been edited to drag all the highlights back out again. You're better off being in a kind of ISO range which is more natural. As such, for the amount of light. Now, in an ideal situation, absolutely. If you can introduce more light, if you can get round it by slowing down your shutter speed and widening your aperture, then try and get as low ISO as you possibly can, because it gives you maximum editing possibilities afterwards. But if you can't, and an awful lot of photography is problem solving, if you can't get the ideal settings you want, then ISO tends to be one of these kind of compromise places that often gives you that little bit of extra leeway that other ways of doing it may not. Sandra says, it's making sense to me, and I'm beginning to think I might need to use a higher ISO. Nicholas saying it's all good. Excellent. Okay, Sandra, then that's good. That kind of starts to give you, because I think sometimes we get so obsessed with the idea of a low ISO that we do end up kind of painting ourselves into a corner as such. I mean, sort of, what else was I going to show here? Okay, there's a chunk I was going to show you, which I've missed out, but I don't think it really matters. I mean, one of the other options here is the notion. Actually, I'll tell you what, just before we get into that, let's just pause for a moment and just well, I'll tell you what, let's quick update on the smug points first, because the last month in January there was a tie. There was an equal tie between April and Marilyn on the smug points, and Sandra had already been in contact to say she wanted to talk about the low light photography, so that's why we're now talking. So rather than Marilyn or April choosing this month's topic, I thought I would do the low light one, and I'll set the challenge for that. So there's a rollover with the smug points. Where we are currently at now, joining in what we've had in February and January together so far, is April and Marilyn are still joint leaders at 75 smug points each, Nicola's on 65 and VG's on 55. So there's still all to play for. Next week we're going to have a feedback session, so you get bonus 25 smug points if you put in for the feedback session, and of course you get your 5 smug points if you happen to comment live here. Don't forget to do that. So if you happen to be lurking and you haven't said hello yet, say hello, type it in, you get your bonus 5 smug points. So where were we? Yes, and a quick little reminder as well, that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Of course, the other thing with this is, if you are wanting to send images in for review, for feedback, for critique, or for any of the challenges we're doing, then kimayrespodcast@gmail.com is the email that I've set up specifically for this podcast. It stops my own inbox getting filled up. If you're more comfortable sending it to me the usual way that you always have, then that's fine. But by and large, if you can generally remember, or anybody new, and it doesn't make any difference, move my hand around, try and find the right space, kimayrespodcast@gmail.com is the best place to send images in if you're wanting the feedback or to put them in for challenges. Right. Okay. With that in mind, where were we? What I think I will do, actually, because Sandra sent in a couple of photos, so let's tell you what, let's go to these photos then, because I think it will sort of give us a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. So when Sandra said she went to, now I think this one was the Matlock Illumination. Now, not that one. Where are we? To that one? Nope. That one. Yes, there we go. 277 podcasts in. I'm still messing around with the technicals. I don't think I will ever get it completely fluid. Right, okay, so this photo then, this is the unedited version, or unedited JPEG version of part of the Matlock Illuminations. And then Sandra did edit it and give us this version, which shows up a little bit more. And that's one of the things, I mean, if you look at the original photo in the back of the camera as such, what we're noticing is we can see that there's water, we can see that there's illuminations. If we move in a bit, we can see, all right, yes, it's actually a boat that's lit up, and we can just about make out the person there. And in the front, this is obviously must be a boat too. There's almost, we can just about make out a face there. And then there's a couple more in the background as well, and some what might be lights on trees. When we go to the edited version, where it's lightened up a bit, we can now actually see there's a whole crowd on the other side of the water bank, presumably on the same side that Sandra is as well, all taking a photograph. We can now see the man here a bit better as well. But what we are talking about though is it is noisy. And what was Sandra's settings on this? So Sandra was using f4 200th of a second, ISO 1600. Now ISO 1600 is normally not too bad, but what's happened is a bit like the mannequin in front of the fireplace there. By pulling all the details out of the shadows, we've lost a lot of quality. There's much more noise, colour noise, bits and pieces. And yes, I think there actually is a point here whereby maybe going to a slightly higher ISO, if you had maybe used an ISO of 3200. Also, you've got 200th of a second. And I think you could have maybe dropped that down to 160th of a second. These are moving, but they're not moving that fast. And depending again on how steady you can keep the camera, maybe you could get it down to 125th of a second or something like that. If you had a tripod, you could probably go down to something like 80th of a second. Or maybe if you're leaning against a tree or a pole, or you're feeling a bit more steady with your hand, then that would allow you to. Now, the next thing, you've got an aperture of 4, I think, f4. It's a tricky one. If you go any lower than that, then you're not going to get much in focus. So then you've got to decide what you're going to focus on. Are you going to focus on this one in the front? Are you going to focus on the one at the back? Are you going to? What you're trying to do here is create a kind of a landscape sense of everything that's going on. You're not zooming in on one. Now, if you were zooming in specifically on this one, then maybe you could have a narrower aperture, because it wouldn't matter quite so much whether the stuff in the foreground or behind it was out of focus. But you're trying to focus everything. So the fact that you've actually got this much in focus on an f4 is pretty good, to be honest. But certainly I think 200th of a second, I think you could probably shave a bit off that. And also 1600 ISO. Now you're using but according to the stuff here, the R5 Mark II. Now I've got the R5, which is already pretty good in low light. The Mark II, I think, is possibly slightly better. So I think you could take this possibly up to 3,200, maybe even 4,000, maybe even 6,400, and that would give you so much more light to play with. And then I think you would find that a lot of this stuff in the background wouldn't be quite as noisy, and your noise reduction stuff that you can do then in Photoshop would have much more effect. It would be a better version of it. Just to sort of show you what I mean by that is, if we go back to here, remember we had this image here, that's the noise, that's with the noise reduction, but it's still pretty messy. Whereas if we go to this one, where yes, we've got noise, but if I open this one up again, so we've got the noise, but then I use, so this is 12,800. We can see plenty of noise here. But if I use the DeNoise here in Photoshop, we'll probably find, we should be able to find, now look at that. That's quite incredible. This really does. We've still maintained, if I you know, we can see there's plenty of noise here. I put the DeNoise in and it's actually recovered a lot of the grain of the wood as well. It's quite astonishing just how much detail we've now got in that. And you would never believe that that was taken at 12,800. But so if I open that, now what a difference we've got from using the DeNoise on this, whereas we took that one and we did the DeNoise, and you know, there's a limit to how much there is. I mean, interestingly, if I actually, I'll tell you what, if I take even worse, now if we take the JPEG version, if I of this one, the 100 ISO. Now, this is another thing here actually, which is this notion of why you should shoot RAW. Certainly in low light conditions, shoot RAW, because you will get so much more options afterwards. Because if we think this isn't that great, look what happens if we get the JPEG. Now, I'll close that. That wasn't what I meant to do. Control J is what I meant to do. So I'll duplicate that layer. Let's pull that into Camera Raw and see what we can recover from it. Now, this is the JPEG, not the RAW file. Okay. So now, also, the fact is, if you're not opening the RAW file, if I go to detail on Photoshop here, there isn't that DeNoise. The DeNoise only works on RAW files. You can't do it with a JPEG. So I don't have that DeNoise option. But so let's go to the light. Let's whack up this. Let's bring up the whites. And now, look how much detail we've got. I mean, it's gone. Forget the idea of grain. All we've got is this horrible splash of noise. If I go to detail here, I'll remove the color noise reduction, but it's still turning everything quite a nasty green. I can maybe go to the color auto, sort of. It's making it, so we're going to kind of go drag it into the purples a little bit, maybe going to play around a little bit. It's not liking it at all. So the best I've managed to do in terms of recovering from a JPEG is this. You know, whereas, where are we? This was the best I could do recovering it from the RAW file. So what a difference, okay? So even at the 100 ISO where we've really had to drag it out, it's still better done in the RAW file than it is done in the JPEG. But then if we've got the right ISO, we've managed to go from this one and we've managed to take it up to this, which is astonishingly clean and clear and lots to play with. And then with this, now, if I want to duplicate that, I can then take this in and I can do the usual bits of, you know, we can vignette it a bit. I could auto, maybe I don't want it that. Well, yeah, maybe. Okay, let's auto it a bit, vignette it a bit, go to the effects, add a bit of clarity. And, you know, now we've got quite a fun wee photo out of it, which I could never do that kind of thing. So hopefully then this is really driving home that point of having a high ISO, while generally speaking it's something we try to avoid, because if the cleaner the image to begin with, the better. It's still better to have a higher ISO than a low ISO and then try and drag it back afterwards. You've got limitations. I mean, with any camera, because every camera works slightly differently. Every camera, you know, what I could get away with my Canon R5, I can get away with things that I could never get away with my Canon 7D Mark II. My 7D Mark II, I could get away with things that I could never get away with my 7D Mark I, and things with my 7D Mark I, I could never get away with my bridge camera. Okay, so I mean, I remember my original bridge camera, even ISO 200, ISO 400 was messier than the ISO 12,800 is on my Canon R5. So working with your camera, you push the edges, you push the limits, you go past the limits just to sort of see where your boundaries are. Often we don't know where the boundaries are until we've stepped over them. So play with your camera, go under different conditions, shoot at different ISOs, shoot at different shutter speeds, play with different levels of DeNoise and everything else, and you will start to get a sense of what you can get away with. And what it does then is the more you know your camera, the more you know what the limits are, but also where you can recover things in the editing process, means that you can go out with more confidence in shooting. So I know when I go out shooting at night or in low light conditions, there's a certain amount I can push the camera, knowing that this is as far as I can go. I can't go any slower on this shutter speed, or I really risk it being out of focus, or I can't go any wider on the aperture. But I also know then that, okay, it's maybe not perfect in the back of the camera, but it's close enough to know that I now can recover a few more details in the post-processing. And if you're using your camera a lot and you're going out in a lot of different situations, particularly then for Sandra, who's out there in the street, in the festivals, and you don't have a lot of time to really take your time over the photos, you're grabbing things as they are, then to have that knowledge of your camera and the knowledge of your particular limits, the limits of the camera, but also the limits of how you can hold it under conditions, makes a huge amount of difference. So Sandra says, yeah, definitely will be using a higher ISO. Nick says, I really miss my Nikon D7 2000 with its high ISO capability, especially for night sky shots. Yeah, night sky shots, it also makes a difference. Susan says, my Micro Four Thirds has a noise reduction feature. Any ideas if it's worth using? Well, play. Quite straightforwardly, play. Do 2 identical shots, one with the noise reduction, built-in noise reduction, and one without. As long as if you've got a raw file version of it as well, because the problem that sometimes happens with the built-in is the built-in makes a bunch of decisions for you, but a bit like having the JPEG removes a lot of information. And if it's just a daytime photo where you're not making any real changes or edits to it, sometimes the JPEG is doing a perfectly good job. Where the JPEG falls is when falls down, is when you're wanting to make adjustments in the editing. And if your DeNoise feature somehow removes certain information, it means you won't be able to recover it afterwards. Now, in a way, that kind of brings me on to the last major point I wanted to make about this, which is sometimes use your phone. Actually, it's a second last point, right? But there is a point where I'll say use your phone. These things are intensely sophisticated. They have, not only do they have, image stabilization, autofocus, auto exposure, face recognition, all that kind of stuff. What they tend to do is Sandra mentioned the idea of bracketing earlier. Now, in bracketing photography, what you do, you generally have to have the camera absolutely steady, because what you do is you then take a photo of the scene and you underexpose it, regularly expose it, and overexpose it. And the overexposing means you get more detail coming out of the shadows. The underexposing means you get the details back out of the highlights, and then you regular to give you a mid-range. Sometimes you can do bracketing for 5 levels or even 7. And then, so you're essentially taking the same photo multiple times at different exposures. And then in something like Photoshop or whatever editing software you're using, you can then combine these and you get a full range. This is what high dynamic range, HDR photography, is all about. The thing is, does this automatically. Whenever you take a photo, I mean, I'm astounded the number of times that this seems to take a better photo than even my DSLR in low light conditions, because it's taking multiple photos and then putting them together. However, it's not shooting raw. And this means that it's limiting what I might be able to do afterwards. And so now we come on to a little bit here, which is about where your image is going to appear. Because ultimately, if your image is only ever going to appear on a phone, on a tablet, on a computer screen, without anybody zooming in, without having to worry about print, you can get away with an awful lot more. That 12,800 ISO picture, I mean, okay, let's flip back to here for a sec. If I go back to the unedited version here, I pull out to here. Now you're looking at this on a screen and you probably can't even tell that it's noisy, right? We only know it's noisy because I'm zooming right in. Now we can see the noise. But if your picture is only appearing on a phone or a tablet, you know, a little bit of a screen on PhotoCrowd or something like that, you're never going to know. So you've got to kind of, where it makes a difference is if you're going to print it. Okay, Marilyn says, I switched to RAW and it's made all the difference for me. It will do in the editing. April says, question, did you ever download a picture from your camera and print it out? Well, I download all the pictures from my camera and then I have them in folders, and then printing them out comes down to, yes, some of them do get printed. But the thing is I edit them all digitally, and then I make sure that I've got them in a high resolution format. And if you're going to print them, you need to make sure that they're saved at 300 dots per inch rather than 72 dots per inch. There's a whole bunch of different things. Oh, hang on a sec. What did she say? Oh, sorry, I meant phone, not the camera. Okay, right. Okay. Have I ever printed out stuff from my phone? I don't know that I actually have, because there's not been a need to. So yes, but I see where you're coming from. This is a key point, April, which is, where is the picture going to appear? And if the picture is only ever going to appear on screen and it's not going to be zoomed in, very often what you can get with your phone is going to be just as good as, if not slightly better than, what you might be getting with your DSLR. So let me show you an example of what I mean with that. So last week we were talking about the Firelight Trio photo that I did. So let's see this. So we had the Firelight Trio photo. Now this one is set up. This is full on high resolution camera, 3 different lights going off, all sorts of balance. We talked a lot about this, right? And what this means is this is a high quality printable image. So I can zoom right in here, and we can see dust on the fiddle. We can see the beard hairs of Gavin. We can see the ring on Phil's hand and Ruth's over here. We can see fingernails. There's grain of the wood in the fire, the charcoal notion of the fire. We've got all the detail we could want. This could be printed up to A1 size. This could be printed up and put on the side of a bus if you wanted. And it can handle being printed and printed large. But what I also did when I was, when we were there, was I did a phone photo while I was checking. Now this one is without any of the lights going off. The phone wasn't clipping the lights. Now we don't end up with the backlight and the moonlight and all the rest of it and the sophistication. But as a phone photo, this doesn't look too, if this is only appearing on your screen, it's quite a fun little photo. We've got the glow around the fire. It's got the warmth. It's got them looking into it. Ostensibly, this was my test photo for what ended up as this. And there's something quite nice about this. It's great. You're getting the warmth, and it's managing to capture. Now, as we zoom in, we're not getting all the detail on the beard. We're not getting the dust on the fiddle. The detail, you can't make out Ruth's fingernails as such. So the quality isn't there to print up. Now, you may remember that the image, ended up on the cover of the album cover of the new album Midnight Followed by the Firelight Trio. Now, I'm putting this up on Instagram. Interestingly, the graphic designer has posted that he had so much fun playing with this because it was a good quality photo to begin with. Whereas if I'd handed in this one, this would have really struggled to be able to be printed and maintain the detail, because when we zoom in, you could see that there's fuzz, there's colour noise kicking about. The quality isn't there in the same level. But if it's only ever appearing on a screen, it's not a bad photo. Now, what I also did, there was something originally I quite liked about this photo, which I thought was, am I losing something by doing all the high-tech stuff? There's something kind of raw and intense about this. So I thought, well, okay, let's try and create, using my big camera. I did this. So this one's done with the R5, okay? But in order to get them lit up enough, what's the settings on that? I'm at f5.6, a 2-second exposure, and an ISO of 5000. So I've got a 2-second exposure on this. And the problem is with a 2-second exposure is the flames just complete whiteout. We're now not getting any detail in the wood at all. There might be slightly more detail, but we're still, and for ISO 5000, we're getting a bit like the phone photo. We're not getting the dust. We're not really getting the fingernails, or barely. Little sparks are leaving light trails moving across the screen. So in some ways, if we go back to the phone photo and I flick backwards and forwards between the DSLR, sorry, the mirrorless photo, the big camera photo, and the phone photo, actually the phone photo is the better photo. This one, look at the amount of detail that's in the wood, in the fireplace. This one, we've lost all the detail in the fireplace. So this is where, without the extra light, without me having 3 flashes and all the rest of it to try and make it, if we're only talking purely about the idea of an image that's just going to appear on your screen, I would say in this case, my phone has outdone my super expensive mirrorless big camera. Okay, so this is a really important point of where is the image going to end up. You don't have to worry about high ISO, you don't have to worry about levels of detail and what have you, if it's only ever going to appear this big, or with somebody scrolling it on their phone, or they're looking at it on a tablet or something like that. What have we got here? Nicola said, as a former graphic designer, it was always a delight to work with the best quality photos. It made all the difference. And I've had that feedback before. In fact, actually, I have a funny feeling, Nicola, you worked on one of the blood bikes photo. Did you do the blood bikes big poster? Because I think with that one, I mean, that was a high quality. I mean, I was using a DSLR and it was about 4 or 5 pictures stitched together. So the resolution of it was massive. And I do remember hearing that the graphic designer was very happy with the fact that it was a big picture to work on, that the quality was there to work on. Oh, Marcy's joined us, says, good morning. The only thing missing is a dog sleeping down by the fire. Yeah, an old dog. I know what you mean by that image, Marcy. Yes, thank you. Oh, yes, Nicola says, yes, she did work on that. So, yes, if the thing is going, so ultimately then, if you're going to print, then you need to have this quality of image. Okay, so in order to get this image, I had to have flashes, I had to have camera on a tripod, I had to have the big camera, I had to have an ISO of, what was the ISO I did on this? I had an ISO of 400 on this, okay, because I knew at this level of camera, 400 is easy peasy, it's not going to have any problems at 400. Whereas, go back 20 years, my old bridge camera, ISO 400 was almost breaking the picture. So, but if we are talking about just purely to appear on the screen, then the phone photo, I would say, has worked better than my big camera photo. So with that in mind, like I say, depending on where it's going, sometimes this will do the job better. The other thing, the other option now, is when you're in limited conditions, is to lean into it. Okay, where you go, okay, I've got a restriction. How do I make the most of the restriction? How do I actually make a feature out of the restriction? So what it might be, so if you're talking about the likes of that you're in low light conditions, what if you really push that low light condition? Now, one of the things, so you decide you need to go slow shutter speed. Slow shutter speed allows you to get light trails. Now, rather than trying to avoid the blur, what we do is we actually use the blur. So if we do something like this, for example, this one just shot from the bedroom window. So this is at 1.3 of a second. And so we've got car trails. here we can't even see 1.3 of a second enough for the car to drive and disappear out of the picture. So we've got headlights, white headlights coming up down here. We've got car putting on its brakes here, indicator going. Here we can see a car turning the corner and the indicators. We can see the ghost of a car as it's turning because it's slowed down enough. And then there's another couple of cars up here which have gone. And in the course of 1.3 seconds, it's moved so far that it's actually not registering on the sensor. The light is, so we end up with these light trails. Alternatively, you go to something like this. There's a fairground at night. And what's this? This is 6 seconds. So this is a 6-second exposure, right? And that 6-second exposure has allowed the big wheel, which, has just gone. It seems to become this almost super, it's almost like an LP on a record player or faster. It's like, it looks like it's whizzing. Now, obviously it wasn't going anything like this fast. In the 6 seconds, it's probably gone from one of these nodges to another, but it's enough to start leaving smears. And because we've got all these bits, so we've got smears of light. So the camera's on a tripod, or maybe, I doubt whether I took a tripod with me. Chances are I'm resting on a fence post or maybe a car roof or something like that. And I will have set the camera to a 2-second timer so I can go click. And then within the 2 seconds, it stopped wobbling and then it takes it on timer. And that allowed me then to capture, to actually make the most. So you can lean into that idea of the slow shutter speed. The other option is, if you go high noise, is to lean into the notion of the noise in the editing. One of the tricks I've talked before about with high ISO. Now, high ISO, as we saw earlier with the little mannequin, can be, when you get that noise, especially when you get color noise, it's ugly. It just really makes it kind of ugh. But if you go black and white very often gives you this sort of sense of a grain like we used to have with film. And you can get quite a different idea. So let me show you another example here, which is, now this is a photo by Meg, my daughter Meg. And I think I probably would have shown this photo several years ago when I did a little talk about a particular shoot that I did. And what Meg did was she took this photo. Now, the first thing your eye is probably getting drawn to is this guy blinking. That's not the interesting bit. Here we can see Meg in the background, and here we can see Chelsea. She's now the focus is here on the back of Chelsea's neck. And then we've got Chelsea's reflection, and then we've got Meg over there. Now, what we can see here is that the ISO is quite brutal. The quality is very limited. And Meg's using little Fujifilm Fine Pix camera. And this is ISO 1600. So this is pushing this camera to the limit. However, what we managed to create out of that photo was this. Okay. And this photo is really cool. This is kind of has almost like a 1960s vibe to it. It's kind of iconic black and white, cool photography. Okay. Because what we've done by going black and white, the noise has now become more like grain. And we've brightened it up and we've pushed it and we've contrasted it and we've taken this idea of that cool iconic idea, black and white photography. Now, when you look at that, this photo looks like, well, oh, what a shame we missed it. But if you know what you're doing and you have a vision for it, we can turn it into something like this. Okay, so this is an example of where a high ISO on an old camera that normally we would have just gone, okay, conditions were too low. We lent into it. Go, okay, let's use that idea of the high ISO, but turn it to black and white and go for this idea of grain. A couple of comments saying that's so neat. Nice one, Meg. Very nice, Meg. VG, yes, looks very vintage. Sandra, the black and white conversion works really well. Well done, Meg. Yes. Another idea here. I mean, again, nighttime shot. This is fog, nighttime, outside. And again, you can see as we zoom in, lots of noise. It's a very dark night. But that noise, because it's in black and white, just actually adds to that kind of moody old black and white photo kind of feel to it. So what we're doing is whether it's this or whether it's this, you're combining the subject matter with an editing process that is actually enhancing the subject matter. You're enhancing your narrative by actually leaning into the high ISO, by leaning into the, taking away the color to maximize this idea. And ultimately then, this is what we're coming back to, is story. Everything I ever talk about on these podcasts is story. Where's the photo going to be seen? Who's going to be viewing it? What story are you trying to communicate? And if you understand that, then every single other decision you make follows from that. So all this bit about, do I go high ISO? Do I go slow shutter speeds? Do I have it in color? Do I have it in black and white? Do I try and take in the whole picture? Do I zero in on a detail? Understand the narrative. And if in that moment, and it takes practice, we're not used to doing this. Most of the time, what we tend to do is we take a whole bunch of photos and then we come back and we look at them and we go, oh, what can I rescue from this? But if in the moment, you can kind of take a moment to pause and go, actually, what is it about this scene before me that is really interesting me? What is it about this thing that makes me go, ooh, I like that? How can I then emphasize that bit? What is it I love about this? Is it this contrast? Is it this juxtaposition? Is it this in relation to that? Is it the way the light is falling? Is it the action? Is it the mood? What is it about this scene before me that is actually making me want to reach for my camera or pull my phone out? And if you can practically say it out loud, even if you're just whispering it under your breath, you can stand in front and you go, what I love is the silhouette of that tree against the sun. What I love is the way that child is laughing, not just the way the child is laughing, but the way his father is jumping in front of him. What is it that I love about, the light that's coming down onto the crowd of people there? And once I understand that that's the bit I want, that helps inform, okay, now, do I need a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed? Do I need a wide aperture or a narrow aperture? Do I need am I going to be, and also with that, where's it going to be seen? Am I taking this with the idea that it's going to be printed on a calendar or in a magazine or to go on my wall? Or is this just going to be a fun photo that's never going to go much beyond the screen? Unlikely, it might go in for a photo crowd or guru shots competition, but it's not going to be going into the camera club where they're going to be wanting me to print it out. So therefore, I can push further. I can have a higher ISO. I can not worry so much about that it's on my phone. All these kind of, you get to see that every single decision that comes after the narrative. What are you trying to communicate? What's the story you're trying to tell? Understand that, and everything else becomes so much easier to make those decisions. Okay, so I hope that all helps. I hope that all kind of makes sense. Reaching for my glasses up here, I'll put them down there. Marcy says that's sometimes why I don't mind a higher ISO when shooting black and white. What I would say actually with that, Marcy, though, is don't shoot in black and white unless you're using old film camera. But if you're shooting digital, shoot in colour, because there are several different ways you can convert to black and white. And I've got previous podcasts where I've talked about that before. You can find them easily enough. Or I've no doubt I will talk about it again in the future. But if you shoot in black and white, the camera has made the decision for you. So are those reds going to be darker or lighter compared to the greens or compared to the blues? If you shoot in colour, when you convert to black and white, you can change the ratio and the lightness and darkness of the different colour elements in that black and white setting. So you have ultimately much more control. So even if we take something like this picture, if you look at the colour version, these are green towels up here. Now, some forms of black and white might have turned those green towels quite dark. We've done a version of it where it's kept them lighter because it was just kind of, it sort of seemed to fit better. But I was able, when I was on the screen and I was editing, to play around with the different edits. Okay, so it's always worth having what we're looking for, like the idea of shooting in RAW, is for you to have maximum control, because the camera is always going to be slightly limited in what it's being able to capture in front of you. You're never going to, I never say never. It's extraordinarily rare for you to get absolutely everything you wanted just in camera. But the more you can get in camera, the better, because then when you take it to the editing process, you've got much more to maneuver, much more to play with, much more to be able to make these subtle little differences as to whether you want to lighten that or darken that or crop that bit out or or subtly color grade or shift, or however you do it. And so yes, you're looking for maximum control. That is if you do editing and you enjoy doing editing. Marcy says, good point. Fiji says, mixed photo has all of these, narrative part. Love the shot. Right, okay. So I think that's kind of where we got to. So really what we're talking about is in low light situations, to sum all this up, in low light situations, what we're talking about is you have to make a compromise somewhere. Now, you might decide to make a compromise on having a slower shutter speed. You might make a compromise on having a wider aperture. You might make a compromise on a higher ISO. Each of these has their down points and their positive points. But part of that is coming down to how this photo is going to be seen, how you're going to edit it afterwards, and what restrictions are going to be on you. And sometimes it's also about leaning into those restrictions and going, okay, well, if I have to have an ISO, can I make it a high ISO? Can I make an interesting black and white photo out of it? If I have to have a slow shutter speed, can I lean into that and go for deliberate like light trails and things like that? If I have to have a wide aperture, should I make the most of that and actually kind of zoom in on things and go for the whole soft bokeh effect? Rather than worrying about not getting everything in focus. So if you know you've got to have a wide aperture, go for wide aperture friendly shots. If you know you're going to have a slow shutter speed, go for slow shutter speed friendly shots. If you know you have to have high ISO, go for high ISO friendly shots. So take your restrictions and actually lean into them rather than cursing them as such. And then if you're in a situation like I was with the Firelight Trio, where I just can't afford to have a shutter speed that's too low, I can't afford to have a high ISO, I can't afford to have a wide aperture, I have to have all these things, then at that point I take much more control over the setup and I introduce artificial lighting but I move that artificial lighting to try and make it look as natural as possible. So hopefully then that all makes sense. So with that in mind, and if you came in late at the end of this, you can go back, watch it again at the beginning. I'm now setting the low light challenge. Okay, so not that one. No, not that one. That one, yes. So in 2 weeks' time, we will be having the low light photo challenge. So send me your low light photo challenge entry to kimairspodcast@gmail.com. Okay, so this is your chance. Just send me the one. Find me an interesting image that was shot in low light, and where the low light is the specific point of the photo. And if you've got a good tale to go with it, even better. Tell me something about the photo as well, because I think the stories of the photos are really a good chunk of the interest of these challenges. Okay. Everybody send me a good image of your favourite image, or one that you're particularly pleased with that was shot in low light conditions. And then tell me what you're up against and maybe how you overcame, what you did specifically to deal with the low light conditions. And then what that will also do is your experience and how you coped with it, we then give out to everybody else, and everybody benefits from everybody else's. We have fun, we look at great photos, and we all learn a whole lot more. So that's the benefit of these challenges. And then I will also be throwing some extra smug points into the pool. And given the fact that we are so close here with Marilyn and April neck and neck, Nicola and VG just marginally behind, could tip the balance as to who gets the maximum smug points for the rollover joint January and February, who gets to choose in March what the next topic will be. Lisa's saying this has all been incredibly helpful, and so is Marilyn. That's great. Okay, cool. So that basically brings us to the end of it. Thank you ever so much to Sandra for the ideas, for kicking off the picture, the topic, and thank you to everybody else, of course, for turning up, leaving comments, giving feedback, all the usual kind of stuff. Next week will be a feedback session, so do make sure you remember, bonus 25 points for getting images in for a feedback session. I can put in up to 4 images, but I've already got one as well. April's already got hers in, but send images to kimezpodcast@gmail.com. Look forward to seeing you all next week for the feedback. Send me your images and start thinking about the low light photo challenge. I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.